Introduction, The Rebirth, My Spiritual Mission Statement, G-Money's Mission Statement, encompassing an overview of his metamorphosis from army soldier to spiritual soldier in Tupac's philosophical army. Part 1, Exodus, chronicles the literal events surrounding G-Money's breakdown in the desert during training prior to leaving for his second Iraq tour, and the influence Tupac played in that epiphany. Part 2, Genesis, of this warrior's life, discusses the transition G-Money made once back home in Brooklyn from a philosophical vision to the physical manifestations of that vision on the New York streets as he began to speak his vision publicly to potential recruits. Part 3, Ben Ami, G-Money's spiritual declaration to the world of his intention to practice the preachings of Ben Ami to his soldiers in the streets as his movement begins to organize. Part 4, Our Saga Begins, introduces G-Money's local, i.e. Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, cast of characters/recruits and begins his formal dialogues with various personalities, including a fellow Iraqi soldier, Greg Thompson, who becomes an important player in G-Money's movement, his, G-Money's, vision and his cast of characters, role in executing that vision. Part 5, The Prince of War, chronicles G-Money's evolution into the head of his own army of soldiers, following the guidelines of Machiavelli's The Prince, and the start of their embrace of his movement. Part 6, Greg and Kim. The second generation is born. G-Money hooks Greg up with Lil Kim, who becomes his partner in spreading the next generation of G-Money's message, including her pregnancy with their child, emblematic of the next step in G-Money's revolution unfolding. Part 7, The Next Generation of G-Money Grows, chronicles the survival of G-Money's right-hand man, Greg, who was returned to Iraq for another tour of war, and injured in the field. Upon return to Brooklyn, he is done with the army, and ready to pick up the fight in the streets to help G-Money gather his troops, and prepare for their spiritual war upon the system. Part 8, You Better Listen or Be a Victim. As G-Money's message begins to expand throughout the community, we see here the substance of his vision beginning to resonate in the minds of several newly introduced characters who are not only ready, but fired up, about taking up arms against a system that G-Money preaches has imprisoned their minds up to that point. Part 9, The Morpheus Tech Squad is born. In this chapter, G-Money hooks up with Daco, a Mexican-American ex-soldier from G-Money's unit, who gets out, joins up with G-Money, becomes his main tech mastermind, similar to Tank from The Matrix. Thereafter, he begins organizing G-Money's clandestine online nerve center. Part 10, Rise of the Soldiers. This chapter marks an important turn in the story where G-Money begins expanding his new movement nationally online to transform the thinking of inner-city youth who have already been exposed to violence, to change their thinking along the lines of Tupac's thug life, but remolded in an updated model inspired by Tupac, but shaped around G-Money's own vision. Part 11, Operation Word of Mouth. G-Money's squad of tech-savvy soldiers begin hacking into government, gang, etc. websites to get a hold of mailing lists from gangs, the VA, etc. Thereafter, G-Money's movement develops their long-range plan to send out recruitment emails to lists with narrative slant depending on group's ideology, plans massive online takeover of opposition websites at a time when their gang is fully tuned into blast message, and performs any other number of other activities. Part 12, The Domino Effect. As G-Money's movement expands beyond New York via the internet, other gang members from LA, Chicago, etc. begin to clandestinely switch loyalties to G-Money's movement from their own. From this feedback/response, G-Money's strategy becomes to target mid-level managers whose stars are on the rise, have loyalty from lower-down gang members, etc., where you could potentially steal them away from their respective gangs and make them part of his own. Part 13, Taking to the Streets. As G-Money begins to travel to other cities to conduct clandestine meetings with lieutenants, etc. within Latin Kings, Crips, Blood, MS-13, he begins to have success in getting them to feel his message, and begins making plans to coordinate a massive defection from their respective gangs to his. In this chapter, G-Money also hooks up with the dude who beeped and threw up a West Side sign, Cobra, who is originally from South Central L.A., and still has loads of gang connections back home. Becomes G-Money's street liaison out in LA. Part 14, The Night Stalker Squad. As his national organization begins to take shape, G-Money establishes the Night Stalker Squad, composed of his street soldiers who hit the hoods around the country when gangs are out in full effect, implementing his team's previously designed strategies to A. Interrupt/recruit and B. Redirect their criminal activities to his more positive rebellious agenda, with the goal in mind of targeting not one another, but rather the system. Part 15, Judgment Day PT. G-Money puts his troops to work in the street, effecting their liberation from their original gangs in the course of joining G-Money's, now formally dubbed the Realist. Those lieutenants who had been organizing in a clandestine fashion for months make their bones and pledge loyalties to G-Money. Upon eliminating their rivals in unfortunate but required, specific targets of violence, these lieutenants assume new positions of leadership within G-Money's, the Realist movement, commanding his street soldiers on the ground in their respective cities, and receiving their broader orders from G-Money via the internet. Part 16, Big Brother. As a rash of gang violence initially results from the aforementioned defections, G-Money's movement catches the attention of the FBI, who assigns veteran agent Ron McNair to hunt down G-Money, who now has gone underground with so many targets on his back, between law enforcement, rival gang leaders, etc. Initially only aware of your website, and unable to make any charges stick, once the violence erupts, the RICO statutes apply to what the FBI deems G-Money's organized crime movement, starting the national manhunt. Conclusion. Judgment Day PT2, the master plan begins. This chapter brings the story to full climax with McNair hot on G-Money's trail, and executing mass arrests of G-Money's soldiers throughout the nation. Coinciding with a specific day G-Money has prophesized about where the government would attempt to bring the Realist movement down, what McNair, etc. failed to realize is by putting G-Money's first platoon of troops into the prison system, they have activated the next phase of his master plan, to control the gangs both in the prisons and on the streets, toward the end of reorganizing the entire U.S. gang apparatus into a new, far more powerful movement following the teachings of G-Money's The Realist Doctrine. This final chapter also sets up the next volume of Soldier's Life.
These were the first parts of the Warrior Life book. If you like part 1, you can purchase and read parts 2 and 3 from Amazon. I will provide link to the book in the description.